My name is Emma Catherine Walsh, and I want to tell you about the day I discovered that betrayal can sometimes be the greatest gift you never knew you needed. Picture this. You're 34, successful, engaged to the man of your dreams when you come home early from a business trip and find your younger sister in your bed with your fiancé. Most women would fall apart. Some would fight back with drama and tears. But what if I told you that catching them together was actually the luckiest moment of my life? What if that betrayal led me to uncover family secrets worth $12 million and a grandmother's revenge plan years in the making? Madison thought she was stealing my happiness, but she had no idea she was actually handing me the keys to an empire. The question is, are you ready to hear how the worst day of my life became my greatest victory? Let me take you back to where it began. I was sitting in my Lincoln Park apartment on a gray February afternoon when I saw that envelope. Pearl white paper, expensive stock, the kind you order from those fancy stationery shops in Winnetka. My hands trembled as I opened it, though I already knew what I'd find inside. The invitation was beautiful, I had to admit. Ivory cardstock with gold embossing, exactly like the design I'd chosen for my own wedding just 4 months earlier. The same calligrapher, the same elegant script, even the same wording. Madison Walsh and Tyler James Mitchell request the pleasure of your company at their wedding ceremony on Saturday, March 15, 2024, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at St. Michael's Catholic Church. But it was the handwritten note tucked inside that made my blood run cold. Dear Emma, I know this might be difficult, but family should celebrate family. Come witness true love. We'd hate for you to miss what real happiness looks like. Love always, Madison and Tyler. I read those words over and over, each time feeling like someone was twisting a knife deeper into my chest. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Madison wasn't just marrying my ex-fiancé, she was using my own wedding plans as the weapon to hurt me with, and she wanted me there to watch it happen. I thought back to that terrible November morning when I'd come home early from my business trip to Milwaukee. I was supposed to be gone until Wednesday, but the client meeting had wrapped up a day early. I'd been excited to surprise Tyler, maybe cook him dinner, maybe work on some of the wedding details we'd been putting off. Instead, I'd walked into our bedroom and found them together in the bed I paid for, tangled up in the sheets we'd received as an engagement gift from my grandmother. The sound that came out of me wasn't quite human, but what hurt more than seeing them together was Tyler's first words to me. Not sorry, not an explanation, just cold justification. Madison's everything, you're not Fiona. She's spontaneous fun alive. All the things that meant I was boring, predictable, dead inside. They'd moved in together the next week. My parents threw them a housewarming party. I wasn't invited, but Mom made sure to tell me how happy they looked together. Now, 3 months later, I was holding their wedding invitation in hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I reached for my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. Sarah, I said when my best friend Sarah Chen answered. It's happening. They sent me an invitation. Oh, honey, she said, and I could hear her putting down whatever she was doing. Tell me you're not actually thinking of going. I stared at the invitation, at Madison's perfect handwriting mocking me with talk of true love and family celebration. The old Emma would have thrown the invitation away and spent the day crying into a bottle of wine. The old Emma would have let Madison win again, just like she always had. But the old Emma hadn't been having secret meetings with Jonathan Hayes, my grandmother's estate attorney. The old Emma didn't know what I now knew about our family's $12 million real estate empire. The old Emma didn't understand what grandmother Victoria had really meant when she'd whispered those words to me on her deathbed 8 months ago. Patience, my dear. The quiet ones change the world. I'm going, I told Sarah, and even I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Emma, no. Don't do this to yourself. It's what she wants to humiliate you. Sarah didn't know about the meetings with Jonathan Hayes. She didn't know about the document sitting in his office safe or the 7 board members who'd been waiting patiently for exactly the right moment. She didn't know about the wooden box I'd been preparing or what was inside it. I'm going, I repeated, looking at my reflection in the apartment window. And I'm going to give them a wedding they'll never forget. I hung up before Sarah could argue further, then walked to my bedroom closet. There, still hanging in its garment bag, was the white Donna Karan dress I'd bought for my own wedding. The one I'd never gotten to wear. Madison wanted me to come witness true love. She wanted me to see what real happiness looked like. She had no idea that in trying to destroy me, she'd actually given me the perfect opportunity to reclaim everything that was rightfully mine. The invitation sat on my coffee table for the rest of that evening, Madison's cruel note visible beneath the elegant script. But I wasn't the same woman who'd received it. I was someone who'd finally learned the difference between being patient and being passive. And in 3 weeks, Madison was going to learn that difference too. Growing up in Winnetka should have been a dream, but in the Walsh household I was always the rough draft, while Madison was the masterpiece. The pattern started early and never stopped. When Madison turned 16, our parents presented her with a white Range Rover in the driveway, complete with a giant red bow, like something out of a car commercial. I watched from my bedroom window as she squealed and jumped up and down, already planning her Instagram posts. For my 16th birthday 2 years earlier, I'd gotten a lecture about responsibility and the keys to Dad's old Honda Civic. "You need to learn the value of hard work," Dad had said, while Mom nodded approvingly. Character building, she'd called it. But character building apparently didn't apply to the golden child. The comparisons were constant at every family gathering, every dinner, every conversation. "Madison's so outgoing. Madison lights up every room she enters. Why can't you be more like your sister Emma? She's such a natural with people." I was the one getting straight A's, spending my weekends volunteering at Habitat for Humanity, building my portfolio for architecture school. Madison was posting selfies and collecting Instagram followers. Guess whose achievements got celebrated at Sunday dinners? The Illinois State Architecture Competition was my junior year at Northwestern. I'd worked for months on my sustainable housing design, researching green building techniques, interviewing families in low-income neighborhoods about their needs. When I won first place, beating out entries from University of Chicago and Illinois Institute of Technology, I thought, finally, this would be the moment my parents saw what I could accomplish. The celebration dinner lasted exactly until Madison announced she'd landed a sponsorship deal with some skincare company. Suddenly, the conversation shifted to her growing social media presence and how proud they were of her entrepreneurial spirit. My trophy sat forgotten on the side table while everyone gathered around Madison's phone to look at her latest branded post. I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern with my architecture degree. Madison barely scraped through DePaul with a communications major, spending most of her senior year traveling to influencer events instead of attending classes. My graduation was a small ceremony with immediate family and a few friends from school. Madison's graduation party filled our entire backyard with 200 guests, a DJ, and a champagne fountain. "Your sister's just more social," Mom would say when I pointed out the disparity. "You're the serious one, Emma. You don't need all that attention." But there was one person who saw through it all. Grandmother Victoria would watch these family dynamics with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd built Walsh Properties from nothing back in 1975 when women weren't supposed to run construction companies or negotiate commercial real estate deals. While everyone else fussed over Madison's latest brand partnership, Grandma Victoria would ask me about my work at Morrison & Associates, about the sustainable development projects I was designing. "You have something Madison will never have," she told me one afternoon when we were alone in her garden. We were sitting on the stone bench she'd had installed overlooking the lake, and she was wearing that old cardigan she'd had for 20 years because she never cared about impressing anyone. "What's that, Grandma?" "Substance, patience, and the ability to build something lasting. Madison takes whatever catches her eye in the moment. You create things that endure." I thought she was talking about my architecture career, about the buildings I was designing that would stand for decades. I thought she meant the difference between creating Instagram content and creating actual structures that housed families and fostered communities. During her final weeks, when the cancer was winning and she could barely keep her eyes open for more than a few minutes at a time, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. The quiet ones change the world, she whispered. Just be patient, my dear. Everything happens in its right time. I held her hand and promised I would be patient, thinking. She meant patient with my career, patient with finding the right projects, patient with building my reputation in Chicago's competitive architecture scene. I had no idea she was talking about something much bigger than my professional life. I had no idea she'd been planning for years to give me the tools to finally stop being patient and start taking action. Madison had spent our entire lives taking everything that mattered to me. My achievements got overshadowed, my relationships got undermined, my successes got minimized, while her mediocrity got celebrated. She saw my engagement ring and decided she wanted Tyler too. But this time, Madison had finally overreached. This time, she'd taken something from someone who'd been waiting 34 years to teach her the difference between deserving something and simply wanting it. Madison's talent for taking what belonged to me started small and grew bolder with each success. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly now, each theft more brazen than the last. It began in high school with Jake Morrison. He was my first real boyfriend, sweet and awkward, the kind of guy who brought me wildflowers he'd picked from his mother's garden. We'd been dating for 6 months when homecoming rolled around. I'd bought a navy blue dress from Nordstrom, spent weeks planning our evening together. The night of the dance, I found them in his car in the school parking lot. Madison's homecoming dress hiked up around her thighs, Jake's hands tangled in her perfectly curled hair. When I knocked on the fogged-up window, she had the audacity to act surprised. "Emma, thank God you're here," she'd said, straightening her dress with practiced innocence. "Jake just attacked me." I tried to push him away, but he wouldn't listen. Jake's face went white. "That's not what happened, Emma. She came on to me, she said you two were breaking up anyway." But who were my parents going to believe their precious Madison or some teenage boy with obvious motives? Jake was banned from our house within the hour, and I was told to stop being so dramatic about teenage romance. The Northwestern Architecture Scholarship was Madison's masterpiece of manipulation. I'd spent 3 years building toward that moment, maintaining a perfect GPA while working 20 hours a week at a local design firm, volunteering every weekend with Habitat for Humanity. My portfolio was my pride and joy, 50 pages of detailed drawings, sustainable design concepts, community impact studies. The night before my interview, I'd laid everything out on my desk one final time, making sure every page was perfect. When I woke up the next morning, the portfolio was gone. I tore my room apart looking for it, panic rising in my throat as the interview time approached. Madison found it 3 hours later in the basement laundry room, completely soaked from a burst pipe that had mysteriously started leaking overnight. "Oh my God, Emma, look what happened to your portfolio," she'd said, holding up the ruined pages with perfectly practiced concern. "The pipe must have burst during the night. Everything's destroyed." I called Northwestern in tears, begging to reschedule, but they'd already filled their interview slots. That's when Madison stepped up with her sudden interest in humanitarian architecture. "I've always been passionate about housing issues," she'd told the scholarship committee with a straight face. "My sister Emma actually inspired me to look into this field. She got $50,000 she never used for anything even remotely related to architecture. I got a form letter thanking me for my interest and encouraging me to apply again next year. But Tyler was different. Tyler was supposed to be mine forever." We'd met at the Chicago Architecture Foundation Gala in October 2021. He was charming in that confident way successful men often are, talking about sustainable development and urban renewal projects with genuine passion. We spent the entire evening discussing green building techniques and community-focused design. By our third date, I was already imagining our future together. For 2 years, we built something real. Sunday mornings reading the Tribune, in bed evening walks along Lake Michigan, planning our dream projects. We talked about starting our own firm, specializing in affordable, sustainable housing, about the brownstone we'd buy in Lincoln Park, about maybe having kids someday when the business was established. Tyler proposed on the roof of our apartment building on a clear September night when you could see all the way to the lake. The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire setting with a diamond that caught the city lights. Madison was living in Miami, then building her influencer career with beach photos and sponsored posts about skincare routines. She'd been out of our daily lives for almost 2 years, which should have been my first warning. Madison never stayed away from anything worth having. She came home for Thanksgiving 2023, and I watched her eyes lock onto my engagement ring the moment she walked through the door. I saw something shift in her expression, that familiar, calculating look I'd learned to recognize over the years. By Christmas, she was texting Tyler constantly about business opportunities and social media marketing strategies. By New Year's, she'd moved back to Chicago temporarily to explore new career possibilities. By Valentine's Day, she was showing up uninvited to our dinner dates, laughing too loud at Tyler's jokes, touching his arm when she made her points. "You're being paranoid," Tyler said when I brought it up. "She's your sister, Emma. She's just being friendly." Friendly. That's what he called it when I found her Cartier bracelet in our bedroom dresser drawer in March. Friendly was his explanation for why she had a key to our apartment. Friendly was how he described their 3-hour lunches while I was at work. But Madison had made one crucial mistake this time. In her rush to steal my life, she'd failed to look closely at what she was actually taking. She saw the successful boyfriend, the engagement, ring, the wedding plans. She didn't see the debts, the lies, the desperate financial situation Tyler had been hiding from me for months. Most importantly, she had no idea what grandmother Victoria had been planning, or how her theft of Tyler would be the key that unlocked everything I'd been waiting my whole life to claim. The truth about Tyler James Mitchell came to light thanks to Maria Santos, a former FBI investigator turned private detective who specialized in financial fraud cases. I'd hired her 2 weeks after finding Madison's bracelet, when I finally admitted to myself that something was seriously wrong. Maria's office was in a converted warehouse in River North, all exposed brick and industrial lighting. She spread Tyler's financial records across her desk like a coroner performing an autopsy, each document revealing another layer of deception. "Your fiancé is in deep trouble, Emma," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "We're talking about $285,000 in total debt. Here's how it breaks down." She handed me a folder thick with bank statements and credit reports. $180,000 in business loans for 3 separate tech startups that exist only on paper. Tyler had incorporated companies with impressive names like Nexus Innovation Solutions and Digital Futures Consulting, complete with fake websites and LinkedIn profiles for non-existent employees. The revolutionary AI app he'd been working on for 2 years. Maria pulled out a laptop and showed me Tyler's actual work product. PowerPoint presentations, full of buzzwords and stock photos, fake investor pitch decks, elaborate Gantt charts for projects that would never be built. "He's been living in investor meeting rooms," she explained, clicking through slides titled Revolutionary Machine Learning Platform and Next Generation User Experience Interface. He books conference rooms at WeWork spaces, brings coffee and pastries, shows these presentations to anyone who'll listen. Most people see through it immediately, but he only needs one person to bite. The gambling debts were documented in casino surveillance footage Maria had obtained through her law enforcement connections. $95,000 lost at underground poker games in Chinatown and at riverboat casinos along the Illinois River. The footage showed Tyler sweating through expensive shirts, doubling down on losing hands, borrowing money from loan sharks who didn't take credit cards. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. Tyler had opened 4 different credit cards in my name, using my social security number and information from documents I'd trusted him with when we'd applied for apartment leases and insurance policies together. He maxed out $10,000 across these cards, she said, showing me statements I'd never seen. The charges were clever, spread out over months to avoid triggering fraud alerts. Business lunches that were actually dates with Madison. Hotel rooms for their meetings while I was traveling for work. Even the bracelet I'd found in our dresser purchased with credit he'd stolen from me. Maria had also uncovered Tyler's pattern of targeting successful women and then moving on to their wealthy relatives when the initial relationship became financially insufficient. His previous victim was Jessica Torres, a marketing executive from Phoenix, who'd lost $180,000 before discovering Tyler was simultaneously pursuing her cousin, a real estate heiress. Jessica filed a police report, but Tyler had moved to Chicago and changed his tactics before any charges could be filed, Maria explained. She's willing to testify about his methods if this goes to court. While Maria was documenting Tyler's fraud, my professional life was imploding in ways that seemed almost coordinated. David Morrison, the CEO of Morrison & Associates, had been treating me differently ever since word of my broken engagement had spread through Chicago's tight-knit architecture community. "Emma, I think you should consider taking some extended personal leave," he'd said, during what was supposed to be a routine project meeting. "Just until things in your private life settle down. The Millennium Waterfront project requires someone without distractions." That project had been my baby for 2 years, a $45 million sustainable housing development on the lakefront. I'd spent months in community meetings working with city planners, designing buildings that would provide affordable housing while meeting the strictest environmental standards. By the end of the week, the project had been reassigned to Bradley Martinez, a junior associate who'd been with the firm for less than a year. The promotion I'd been promised, the bonus I'd been counting on to pay off my student loans, the respect I'd built over 8 years of dedicated work, all of it evaporated faster than Tyler's fake investor presentations. The whispers in the office were constant. "Poor Emma can't even keep a man. Maybe if she'd paid more attention to her personal life instead of burying herself in work. Did you hear he left her for her own sister? How embarrassing." When I finally confronted Tyler about the credit cards, he had the nerve to act like I was overreacting. "It was just temporary, Emma," he said, not even looking up from his laptop where he was probably creating another fake business plan. "I was going to pay it back as soon as the Nexus deal came through." "What Nexus deal, Tyler?" "The company that doesn't exist. The investors who are figments of your imagination." He finally looked at me then, and for just a moment his mask slipped. I saw the desperation underneath the panic of someone who'd been juggling lies for so long he'd forgotten what the truth looked like. But instead of coming clean, instead of apologizing or explaining or asking for help, he went on the attack. "This is exactly why Madison and I work better together," he said. "She understands that sometimes you have to take risks to build something big. You're too conservative, too afraid of everything. Too afraid of everything. Like fraud was just another business strategy I was too timid to embrace." That night, after Tyler stormed out to meet Madison for dinner on credit cards he'd stolen from me, I sat in our apartment surrounded by the evidence of his deception: bank statements, credit reports, surveillance photos, legal documents. The life I'd thought we were building together was just another one of his elaborate presentations, all surface shine with nothing substantial underneath. But Tyler had made one crucial error in his financial calculations. He'd assumed I was just another mark, another victim to be drained and discarded. He had no idea that Maria's investigation was just the beginning, or that the real power in my family had never belonged to the people whose names were on the office doors. The revelation of Victoria Rose Walsh's true empire came during my 4th meeting with Jonathan Hayes in his corner office on LaSalle Street. The mahogany shelves were lined with legal texts and family photographs spanning decades, including several of my grandmother in hard hats at construction sites from the 70s and 80s. "Your grandmother was a remarkably strategic woman," Emma Jonathan said, spreading documents across his conference table like a general planning a campaign. "What your family thinks they know about Walsh Properties is just the tip of the iceberg." He handed me a leather portfolio containing documents I'd never seen before. Corporate filings, property deeds, patent registrations, investment records. Each page revealed another layer of the empire Victoria had built in secret. "Walsh Properties isn't just the family business your father manages," Jonathan explained. "It's the public face of a $12 million network of real estate holdings, development rights, and intellectual property that spans 7 different legal entities." The scope was breathtaking. Victoria owned 4 downtown Chicago commercial buildings through a trust called Lakefront Holdings. She held development rights to 3 suburban shopping centers through Great Lakes Development Corp. Her revolutionary green building patents from the 90s, the ones that had made sustainable construction profitable before it was trendy, were registered under Walsh Innovation Trust. "Your father has been managing properties he never owned, Jonathan," said, pointing to corporate structure charts that showed Victoria's 83% controlling interest in everything. She let him think he was in charge, while she maintained actual control through carefully structured trusts and holding companies. I stared at the documents, trying to process what this meant. Dad had been living in a fantasy, playing CEO of a company that belonged entirely to someone else. All his speeches about building the family legacy, all his decisions about company direction, all of it had been happening at Victoria's discretion. The inheritance conditions were just as strategic as the business structure. The moral character clauses weren't just legal formalities. They were Victoria's way of ensuring her life's work would pass to someone who understood the difference between earning something and simply wanting it. Beneficiaries must remain unmarried, or marry someone of proven financial stability with no criminal history or outstanding debts exceeding $50,000, Jonathan read from the will. Any family member who engages in adultery with an engaged or married person forfeits all inheritance rights permanently. Madison had sealed her own fate the moment she decided to steal Tyler. Even if she'd known about the inheritance, her actions had already disqualified her from receiving a single dollar. The 7-member board of directors included 3 women executives Victoria had mentored over the decades, all successful in their own right, all waiting to rubber stamp my appointment as the rightful heir. Elizabeth Chen, who'd started as Victoria's secretary in 1978 and built her own real estate brokerage firm. Margaret Rodriguez, who'd learned construction management working Victoria's job sites and now owned the largest minority woman-owned construction company in Illinois. Sarah Kim, Victoria's former attorney, who'd helped draft many of the legal structures that kept the empire hidden. These women had been quietly managing Victoria's interests for years, attending board meetings my father didn't even know were happening, approving major decisions while he thought he was making them independently. But the most shocking revelation was the evidence of Robert's embezzlement. Jonathan handed me bank statements showing systematic theft over the past 18 months, fake consulting fees paid to shell companies Robert had created, personal expenses charged to company credit cards, family vacations, country club memberships. Even Madison's Range Rover had been purchased with money stolen from accounts he thought he controlled. $340,000 total, Jonathan said. Your father created a cash flow crisis that threatened the company's survival, never knowing that Victoria had enough assets in reserve to buy and sell the entire operation 10 times over. The timing of Victoria's death and the delayed will reading suddenly made perfect sense. She'd known about Tyler's financial problems through her own investigation, probably conducted by the same security firm Jonathan used for corporate due diligence. She'd suspected Madison would make a play for Tyler once she learned about the engagement. Your grandmother designed this entire scenario, Jonathan explained. She knew your father's weaknesses, knew Madison's patterns, knew Tyler was a fraud. The 6-month delay gave everyone enough time to reveal their true character before the inheritance could be finalized. I thought about Victoria's final words to me about patience and quiet ones changing the world. She hadn't been giving me generic wisdom about waiting for good things to happen. She'd been telling me that she'd already set everything in motion, that all I had to do was wait for the right moment to claim what was mine. The wooden box Jonathan gave me contained copies of everything. Victoria's True Will, the moral character documentation, corporate structure charts evidence of Robert's theft, and detailed financial records proving Tyler's debts and fraudulent activities. Everything I needed to destroy Madison's perfect wedding day and reclaim my family's legacy in one devastating revelation. Your grandmother always believed you were the only one in the family with the integrity to handle this responsibility, Jonathan said, as I carefully packed the documents back into the box. She spent years positioning everything so that when this moment came, you'd have all the tools you needed to protect what she'd built. Sitting in that office, holding the box that contained the key to everything, I finally understood what Victoria had been teaching me all those years. Patience wasn't about accepting whatever life gave you. It was about waiting for the perfect moment to take what was rightfully yours. And in 3 days at Madison's wedding, that perfect moment would finally arrive. The corporate conspiracy ran deeper than I'd imagined. It wasn't just Tyler's personal fraud or Madison's sisterly betrayal. David Morrison, the man who'd been my mentor for 8 years, had been working against me from the beginning. I discovered this through a recording Sarah Chen had made accidentally during a company holiday party in December. She'd been using a voice memo app to remind herself to pick up dry cleaning when she walked past Morrison's office and heard him on a phone call that would change everything. "Listen to this," Emma Sarah said when she played the recording for me in her apartment 2 weeks before the wedding. She was nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup like she was afraid of what the words would do once they were out in the open. Morrison's voice was crystal clear through her phone speaker, casual and confident in a way that made my skin crawl. "The Walsh situation is more promising than we initially thought. Tyler's convinced that once he's married into the family, we'll have access to their development properties. The old lady left everything to the kids, and Madison's more malleable than Emma ever was." There was another voice on the call, someone I didn't recognize at first. "What about Emma's projects? Won't she be suspicious if we move too quickly?" That was Tyler. Tyler had been in Morrison's office discussing my career, my future, my family's business, like I was a chess piece to be moved around the board. "Emma's been sidelined already," Morrison replied with satisfaction. "I've made sure of that. The Millennium Project was reassigned, her promotion's been indefinitely postponed. By the time she figures out what's happening, we'll have the Walsh partnership locked down." The recording was 18 minutes long. 18 minutes of the 2 men in my life I'd trusted most plotting to use my family's business to enrich themselves. Morrison had invested $200,000 in Tyler's fake tech startups, believing he was getting early access to a future Walsh Properties partnership. The plan was elaborate and cruel. Tyler would marry into the Walsh family, gaining insider knowledge of our development projects and financial status. Morrison would then approach my father with a strategic partnership proposal that was essentially a buyout disguised as collaboration. They'd use Morrison and Associates' established reputation to acquire Walsh Properties' most valuable assets while leaving my family with the debts and liabilities. When Tyler realized I wouldn't inherit everything due to Victoria's strategic planning, he'd simply pivoted to Madison, convincing Morrison that the younger sister would be easier to manipulate and control. "She's always been jealous of Emma anyway," Tyler had said on another recording Sarah found. "Madison will do whatever it takes to prove she's the successful sister. We can use that." Morrison had been feeding Tyler information about my work schedule, my travel plans, even my personal struggles with our relationship. Every time I'd left town for a business meeting, Tyler had known exactly when I'd be gone, and for how long, giving him perfect opportunities to meet with Madison in our apartment. The most damning evidence came from Morrison's computer files, which Sarah had accessed using the password she'd seen him type during a presentation. Corporate emails discussing the Walsh acquisition financial projections based on Tyler's fraudulent claims about our family's wealth, even draft partnership agreements that had been prepared months before Tyler had proposed to me. Morrison had been sabotaging my career, systematically ensuring I'd be desperate enough to marry Tyler quickly, while removing me from projects that might give me leverage in future business negotiations. The Millennium waterfront development that had been stolen from me wasn't just about office politics. It was about isolating me professionally so I wouldn't be able to interfere with their plans. But Morrison and Tyler had made the same mistake everyone else in my life had always made. They'd underestimated the quiet sister, assumed I was too passive to fight back, too naive to see what was happening around me. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos had been recording Tyler's phone calls for weeks, capturing conversations where he discussed his strategy with Morrison in detail. They didn't know that Jonathan Hayes had been monitoring Morrison and Associates' financial transactions, documenting the investment in Tyler's fake companies and the corporate preparation for a Walsh Properties takeover. Most importantly, They had no idea that the real power in my family had never belonged to my father, and that their entire conspiracy was based on information that was fundamentally wrong. I spent hours listening to those recordings, hearing Tyler describe me as too conservative, too suspicious, too controlling. Hearing Morrison dismiss me as a career woman who didn't understand family loyalty or business relationships. Hearing them laugh about how easy it would be to manipulate Madison once Tyler was part of the Walsh family. The rage I felt wasn't the hot, explosive kind that leads to confrontations and dramatic scenes. It was the cold, calculating anger that Victoria had taught me to channel into strategic action. These men had spent months planning to destroy my career and exploit my family's business. They'd used my trust, my love, even my work schedule as weapons against me. But their betrayal had also given me something invaluable: documentation, evidence, recorded confessions of corporate conspiracy and fraud that would destroy their reputations and end their careers just as thoroughly as they'd tried to end mine. When I walked into that church on Saturday, I wouldn't just be carrying Victoria's will and Tyler's financial records. I'd be carrying proof that this betrayal went far beyond a cheating fiancé and a jealous sister. I'd be carrying the evidence that would bring down everyone who'd conspired against me, starting with the wedding that was supposed to be their ultimate victory. The family intervention happened on Wednesday evening, exactly 3 days before Madison's wedding. I was in my apartment reviewing the final details with Jonathan Hayes when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see my parents flanked by Aunt Margaret, all of them wearing the grim expressions of people preparing for battle. "This has gone far enough," Emma Dad announced, the moment I opened the door, brushing past me into the living room like he still had authority over my life. "You will not ruin your sister's wedding with whatever dramatics you're planning." Mom followed behind him, clutching her Chanel purse like a shield, her eyes scanning my apartment for evidence of the trouble she was certain I was plotting. "We're still family," she said, in that voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while delivering ultimatums. "Despite everything that's happened, we need to support each other." Aunt Margaret closed the door behind them and settled onto my couch without invitation, spreading her bulk across the cushions like she was claiming territory. "The entire extended family will be at this wedding, Emma. The Washingtons, the Clearys, the Brennans. What will people think if you show up and cause a scene?" I remained standing by the door watching these 3 people who'd spent my entire life prioritizing Madison's happiness over my dignity. They had no idea what I knew, what I'd discovered, what was waiting in the wooden box on my bedroom dresser. "I'm not causing anything," I said calmly. "I'm attending as invited. Madison sent me a personal invitation, remember?" Dad's face was already turning that dangerous shade of purple that meant he was losing control of a situation he expected to dominate. "Don't be smart with me. The company needs this wedding to go perfectly. Tyler's family has connections, potential investors. Your little hurt feelings can't be allowed to damage business relationships we've spent months developing." That's when I decided to test just how much they actually knew about their precious son-in-law to be. "You mean Tyler's connections to underground poker games and loan sharks? Or are you talking about his failed tech startups that exist only in PowerPoint presentations?" The room went silent. Mom's face went pale, but she recovered quickly with the kind of denial that had enabled decades of Madison's behavior. "You're lying," she said, but her voice wavered. "You're just bitter because Madison found happiness and you can't stand it." I pulled out my phone and showed them Maria Santos's investigative report. Bank statements, casino surveillance photos, corporate registration documents for companies that had never conducted any actual business. Tyler James Mitchell owes $285,000 in gambling debts and business loans, I said, scrolling through the evidence. "He's opened credit cards in my name fraudulently. The FBI has documented his pattern of financial fraud targeting successful women." Dad snatched the phone from my hands, squinting at the screen, like he could make the numbers change through sheer force of will. "This is exactly why he left you, Mom," said her voice, turning vicious. "You're so controlling, so suspicious of everyone. No wonder he found someone warmer, someone who actually trusts the people she loves. Aunt Margaret leaned forward, and I could see the desperation in her eyes for the first time. Emma, honey, maybe there's been some misunderstanding. Tyler's been working with some very promising investors. I co-signed some business loans to help him get started. $150,000. Surely those investments will pay off once his companies get established. My heart actually ached for her in that moment. Margaret had worked her entire life as a bank executive, saved every penny, only to have it stolen by a man who'd targeted her through my family connections. What companies? Aunt Margaret. The ones that exist only as websites Tyler built for $50 each. The ones with fake employee profiles and stock photo offices. She fumbled in her purse for documents, pulling out loan papers and promissory notes that Tyler had signed with the same confidence he'd used when proposing to me with a ring he probably couldn't afford. The family's financial desperation was becoming clear. Dad had been embezzling from accounts he thought he controlled, creating a cash flow crisis he couldn't solve without outside investment. They'd pinned their hopes on Tyler's fake investor network and Madison's social media influence to attract new business and save the company from bankruptcy. When I mentioned Victoria's true will, Dad exploded with a rage that shook the apartment windows. Your grandmother is dead, Emma. Whatever fantasy you've constructed about some secret inheritance isn't going to save you from the consequences of destroying this family. But I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd spent decades believing he was building his own legacy, never realizing he was just managing someone else's empire. Mom tried a different approach, pulling out her checkbook with hands that shook slightly. How much will it take for you to stay home on Saturday? $75,000. We can make this work, Emma. You can start fresh somewhere else, maybe California. There are architecture firms in Los Angeles who'd be lucky to have someone with your credentials. They were offering me money to disappear, to let Madison steal my life completely, while they covered up Tyler's crimes and their own financial mismanagement. I recorded every word of that conversation on the voice memo app Sarah had taught me to use. Patricia admitting they'd known about Tyler's debts. Margaret revealing the extent of her financial exposure. Dad's threats and attempts at bribery. All of it documented, all of it evidence of their willingness to sacrifice me to save themselves. Keep your money, I said as they prepared to leave. You're going to need it for the lawyers. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment, holding the wooden box that contained the power to end this charade forever. In 3 days, these people who'd manipulated and betrayed me would learn that patience wasn't weakness, that quiet didn't mean powerless. They'd spent my entire life underestimating me. On Saturday, I'd show them exactly how much that was going to cost them. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for mid-March in Chicago. I spent those final hours before Madison's wedding in the downtown offices of Walsh Properties with Jonathan Hayes and the 7 board members who would officially approve my appointment as CEO within 24 hours. Elizabeth Chen spread the moral character documentation across the mahogany conference table like evidence in a criminal trial. Tyler's criminal background check, his pattern of financial manipulation detailed in FBI reports, documentation of his adultery with Madison while engaged to me. Each page represented a violation of Victoria's carefully crafted inheritance conditions. The board has reviewed all evidence and voted unanimously to approve your appointment effective immediately following tomorrow's will reading, Elizabeth announced. She was 73 years old, sharp as a blade, wearing the same no-nonsense business suit style she'd favored since the 1970s when she'd started as Victoria's secretary and built her own real estate empire. Margaret Rodriguez, the construction company owner who'd learned her trade working Victoria's job sites, pulled out building permits and development contracts that had been secretly prepared over the past month. Your grandmother anticipated this scenario, Emma. We've been authorized to move forward with 3 major projects the moment you take control. The Lincoln Park Sustainable Housing Development. You designed the riverfront commercial complex and the suburban mixed-use project your father has been trying to get approved for 2 years. Sarah Kim, Victoria's former attorney, handed me corporate documents that would take effect the moment Tyler said I do to Madison. We've prepared fraud charges against Tyler Mitchell, embezzlement charges against your father, and a civil lawsuit against Morrison and Associates for corporate conspiracy. Everything will be filed Monday morning, giving you the weekend to establish your authority before the legal proceedings begin. The wooden box sat open on the table before me, containing copies of everything I'd need for tomorrow's confrontation. Victoria's true will, with its $12 million inheritance and moral character clauses. Tyler's financial records documenting his $285,000 in debts. Evidence of Morrison's investment in Tyler's fake companies and their conspiracy to acquire Walsh properties through fraudulent marriage. Recorded conversations between Tyler and Morrison discussing their plans to manipulate my family. Most importantly, the box contained signed affidavits from Jessica Torres and 2 other women Tyler had defrauded in Phoenix and Denver, establishing his pattern of targeting successful women before moving on to their wealthier relatives. Your grandmother was very specific about the timing, Jonathan said as I carefully packed the documents back into the box. She wanted Tyler's marriage to Madison to be complete before the consequences began. That way, Madison can't claim she was deceived or manipulated. She'll have made her choice with full legal capacity. I left the office as the sun was setting over Lake Michigan and drove home to my apartment for the final preparation. The white Donna Karan dress hung in my closet, still in its garment bag from David's bridal, where I'd purchased it for my own wedding 8 months ago. The dress I'd never gotten to wear because Tyler had decided Madison was more exciting, more spontaneous, more alive. I tried it on one final time, standing before my bedroom mirror, practicing the calm, confident expression I'd need to maintain when 250 wedding guests turned to stare at me. The dress fit perfectly elegant and understated the kind of classic style that never goes out of fashion. The pearl clutch that would carry the wooden box sat on my dresser, a gift from Victoria for my 30th birthday. She'd told me it was perfect for carrying important documents to significant meetings. At the time, I'd thought she meant architectural presentations or business proposals. Now I understood she'd been thinking about this exact moment. Sarah Chen called just after 9 o'clock, her voice tight with worry. Emma, please tell me you're not really going through with this tomorrow. There has to be another way to handle this situation. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, at the woman I'd become over these past months of investigation and discovery. Not the passive, accommodating daughter who'd spent 34 years being overshadowed by her more vibrant sister. Not the trusting fiancé who'd ignored red flags because she wanted to believe in love. This was someone who understood the difference between patience and passivity, between kindness and weakness. I'm honoring Victoria's wishes, I told Sarah. She spent years planning this moment, making sure I'd have everything I need to protect what she built. Madison made her choice when she decided to steal Tyler. Tyler made his choice when he decided to commit fraud. Tomorrow they'll learn about consequences. After Sarah hung up, I sat in my living room holding the wooden box that contained the power to change everything. Tomorrow, Madison would walk down that aisle thinking she'd won the ultimate prize. Tyler would stand at the altar believing he'd successfully manipulated his way into a $12 million inheritance. My parents would smile for the photographers, thinking they'd saved their financial future. None of them had any idea that Victoria Rose Walsh had been 10 steps ahead of them from the beginning, or that the quiet granddaughter they'd all underestimated was about to become the most powerful person in the room. I went to bed early that night, setting my alarm for 8 o'clock, so I'd have plenty of time to prepare. The white dress waited in my closet, the wooden box sat ready on my dresser, and Victoria's voice echoed in my memory. The quiet ones change the world, my dear. Just be patient. The time for patience was almost over. Saturday, March 15th, 2024. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I pulled into the parking lot of St. Michael's Catholic Church in Winnetka, wearing my white Donna Karan dress and carrying Victoria's pearl clutch with the wooden box nestled safely inside. The church looked exactly as I'd imagined it would during all those months when I thought I'd be the bride walking down that aisle. Gothic stone architecture with tall spired towers, stained glass windows depicting scenes from the life of Christ, perfectly manicured grounds dotted with early spring daffodils. Madison had chosen well using the venue I'd toured and fallen in love with back when Tyler and I were planning our own future together. Cars filled every parking space and lined the residential streets for 2 blocks in each direction. Range Rovers and BMWs and Mercedes, the kind of vehicles that announce their owner's success to anyone paying attention. I recognized many of the license plates from family gatherings over the years. The extended Walsh clan dad's business, associates mom's country club friends, all of Madison's social media connections, who treated every event like content creation opportunities. I walked toward the heavy oak doors with measured steps, my heels clicking against the stone pathway in a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The wooden box felt solid and reassuring in my clutch, the weight of Victoria's legacy and Tyler's downfall contained in documents that would change everything in the next hour. The moment I stepped through those doors, 250 heads turned in perfect unison like a choreographed dance. The whispers started immediately rippling through the crowded pews like wind through wheat. That's the ex-fiancé. Why is she here? Oh my God, she's wearing white. The audacity. Can you believe she actually came? This is going to be so awkward. Mrs. Patterson, the wedding coordinator Madison had hired from the same company I'd worked with, came rushing toward me in obvious panic. She was a woman in her 60s who'd probably organized 1,000 weddings without ever encountering a situation like this. "Miss Walsh," she stammered, clutching her clipboard like it might provide protection from the social disaster unfolding before her eyes. We weren't expecting, your invitation, but perhaps you'd be more comfortable." "My invitation says 2 o'clock, I said calmly, pulling the pearl cardstock from my clutch and showing it to her with perfect composure. "I'm right on time." I walked past her stunned silence and chose a seat exactly 7 rows from the altar, close enough to see everything clearly, far enough to avoid immediate confrontation until the moment I chose to create it. The pew I selected gave me a clear view of the altar, where Tyler would soon be standing, and more importantly, where Madison would realize her perfect day was about to become a nightmare. From my strategic position, I could see my parents in the front row. Mom twisted around to stare at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Her face had gone the color of ash, and she was gripping Dad's arm so tightly I could see her knuckles turning white, even from 7 rows away. Dad's reaction was more controlled but no less intense. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching, and his eyes held the kind of cold fury I'd learned to recognize in childhood when Madison and I had pushed him too far. But this time his anger couldn't touch me. This time I held all the power. I spotted 3 board members strategically seated throughout the congregation. Elizabeth Chen, in the 4th row, elegant in navy blue, her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression giving nothing away. Margaret Rodriguez near the back, wearing the kind of understated black suit that spoke of serious business rather than celebration. Sarah Kim, on the opposite side of the church, her legal training evident in the way she was discreetly photographing key guests with her phone. The organ music swelled as the wedding party began their procession, but the atmosphere in the church remained electric with tension. Everyone was whispering, phones were discreetly appearing as people began recording what they sensed would be an unforgettable ceremony. Tyler appeared at the altar looking handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, the same style he'd chosen for our own wedding before Madison decided she wanted him more than I did. His best man whispered something that made him glance nervously in my direction. And when our eyes met across that sacred space, I saw recognition and fear flash across his face in equal measure. Then came Madison radiant. In ivory Vera Wang silk, her blonde hair crowned with white roses, and baby's breath carrying a cascade of peonies and garden roses that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked like every bride's magazine cover come to life, absolutely glowing with triumph and joy. Until she spotted me sitting calmly in my white dress, and her perfect composure cracked just enough for me to see the panic underneath. She grabbed Tyler's arm the moment she reached the altar, her perfectly painted lips moving rapidly as she whispered urgent questions he couldn't answer. Even from my seat, I could read the fury and fear in her body language. She kept glancing in my direction, trying to figure out why I was there, what I was planning, what the wooden box in my lap might contain. Father Thomas O'Brien, a kind-faced Irish priest in his 50s, adjusted his glasses nervously as he surveyed the unusual tension filling his normally peaceful sanctuary. He'd probably never officiated a wedding where the groom's ex-fiancé sat in the congregation wearing white, and he looked like he was questioning whether he should proceed. The moment I'd been waiting for my entire life was finally about to begin. Father O'Brien cleared his throat and began the ceremony with a voice that trembled slightly. Whether from nervousness or the unusual tension filling his sanctuary, I couldn't tell. His Irish accent carried clearly through the church as he addressed the congregation. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Madison Rose Walsh and Tyler James Mitchell in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond that requires honesty, trust, and mutual respect between two people who come together freely without reservation or hidden agendas. Tyler's jaw clenched visibly at those words. I watched him swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to maintain his composure. Madison squeezed his hand, but her eyes kept darting in my direction, trying to read my expression, searching for clues about what I might be planning. This is a commitment that should not be entered into lightly. Father O'Brien continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm. It requires both partners to be truthful about their past, present, and intentions for the future. Marriage is not just a union of hearts, but a legal contract that binds two lives together in the eyes of God and the state of Illinois. Several board members leaned forward slightly in their pews. They knew what was coming, had been preparing for this moment for months under Victoria's careful guidance. Before we proceed with the exchange of vows, I must ask if there are any present who know of a legal impediment to this marriage. If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed was absolute. 250 people held their collective breath, waiting to see if the ex-fiancé in the white dress would actually do what everyone suspected she might. You could have heard a pin drop in that sacred space, the tension so thick it felt like a physical presence pressing down on all of us. Madison turned slightly toward me, and for just a moment her perfect bridal mask slipped completely. Her eyes held a challenge, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth that said, "I dare you, Emma. Do your worst." She thought this was still a game she could win through sheer audacity and social pressure. I stood up slowly, my white dress catching the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows. The pearl clutch felt warm in my hands as I retrieved the wooden box that Victoria had prepared for exactly this moment. "I object," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the stunned congregation without any trace of emotion or anger. "I object on legal grounds that materially affect this union." The gasps that erupted sounded like air being sucked out of the room. Someone's champagne glass hit the stone floor with a sharp crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Phones appeared immediately as guests began recording what they instinctively knew would be an unforgettable moment. Father O'Brien blinked in genuine surprise, his prepared ceremony derailed by something he'd probably never encountered in decades of officiating weddings. "Miss Walsh, this is highly irregular. Could you please explain what you mean by legal grounds?" I walked down the aisle with measured steps, my heels clicking against the stone floor in perfect rhythm. Every eye in that church was fixed on me, but I felt calmer than I had in months. This was the moment Victoria had prepared me for, the culmination of years of patience and strategic planning. "I have authenticated legal documents that establish grounds for objection to this marriage," I announced, holding up the wooden box for everyone to see. These documents contain information that materially affects the legal capacity of both parties to enter into this union. Madison's bouquet was trembling in her hands, now white knuckles showing through her perfectly applied makeup. Tyler looked like he might bolt from the altar at any second, his face drained of all color. Jonathan Hayes rose from his seat in the fifth row, his distinguished silver hair and expensive suit commanding immediate respect from the congregation. "I am Jonathan Michael Hayes, attorney for the Walsh estate," he said in his authoritative courtroom voice. "The documents Miss Walsh carries are legally binding and time-sensitive under Illinois state law. Father O'Brien, I respectfully request that you examine these materials before proceeding with the ceremony." Father O'Brien looked completely out of his depth, glancing between me, Jonathan, the wooden box, and the two people at the altar who were supposed to be getting married in the next few minutes. "This is ridiculous." Madison finally found her voice, though it came out higher and more strained than her usual confident tone. "You can't just walk into someone's wedding and start making accusations, Emma. This is harassment." "Actually, under Illinois marriage law, I can," I replied calmly, reaching the altar and extending the wooden box toward Father O'Brien. "These documents contain information about fraud, deception, and legal impediments that affect the validity of any marriage between these two individuals." Tyler tried to step forward, but his legs seemed unsteady beneath him. "Emma, please," he said, and for the first time I could hear genuine desperation in his voice. "Don't do this here. We can talk privately, work something out. The time for private conversations ended when you decided to steal from me and lie to my family, Tyler. This is exactly where this conversation needs to happen, in front of everyone who needs to hear the truth." Father O'Brien took the wooden box from my hands with trembling fingers, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as he felt its weight and substance. Father O'Brien opened the wooden box, with hands that shook slightly, pulling out the thick stack of legal documents that Victoria had so carefully prepared. His eyes widened as he began reading, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to amazement to something approaching shock. "This document states that the estate of Victoria Rose Walsh, valued at $12 million, is bequeathed to Emma Catherine Walsh." He read aloud, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. "The inheritance is conditional upon specific moral character requirements for all family members." The congregation erupted in whispers and gasps. I could see people leaning forward in their pews, straining to hear every word. Phones were recording from every angle now, capturing the moment that would destroy Madison's perfect day and change our family forever. Furthermore, Father O'Brien continued, "Any Walsh family member who marries someone with outstanding debts exceeding $50,000, a criminal history, or who commits adultery with an engaged person forfeits all inheritance rights permanently." Madison's face went from flushed pink to deathly white in the span of seconds. She looked like someone had physically struck her, her perfect bridal composure crumbling as the implications became clear. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried in the absolute silence of the church. "The company belongs to Dad. Grandma left us equal shares." I turned to address the congregation directly, my voice calm and steady as I delivered the truth that would shatter their illusions. "Tyler James Mitchell owes $285,000 in gambling debts and fraudulent business loans. He opened multiple credit cards in my name without permission. The FBI has documented his pattern of financial crimes targeting successful women." Tyler tried to speak, tried to deny what everyone was hearing, but Jonathan Hayes was already standing with additional documentation. "Mr. Mitchell," Jonathan said in his authoritative attorney voice, "are you denying that you incorporated 3 fake technology companies and solicited investments for businesses that never existed?" The wooden box yielded more devastating evidence as Father O'Brien continued reading. Bank statements showing Tyler's casino losses, corporate registration documents for companies that existed only on paper, surveillance photos from underground poker games where Tyler had borrowed money from loan sharks at crushing interest rates. Madison's world was collapsing in real time, and I could see the exact moment she understood that Tyler had targeted her not for love, but because he thought she would inherit money that would never be hers. "You knew," she said, turning on Tyler, with fury replacing her shock. "You knew about the inheritance and you chose me because you thought I'd get half of it." Tyler's silence was more damning than any confession could have been. His face was gray beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool March air in the church. But the revelations weren't finished. Jonathan Hayes produced recordings of conversations between Tyler and David Morrison discussing their conspiracy to acquire Walsh properties through fraudulent marriage. "Your CEO has been working with Mr. Mitchell to gain access to your family's real estate holdings," Jonathan announced to the stunned congregation. "They plan to merge Morrison and Associates with Walsh Properties after Miss Mitchell married into the family." Morrison, who was seated with other business associates in the middle section, tried to stand and leave, but Elizabeth Chen was blocking the aisle with her phone out, recording everything for legal purposes. The dominoes continued falling as Aunt Margaret's financial exposure was revealed. The $150,000 she'd co-signed for Tyler's fake startups money that would never be recovered because the businesses had never existed. Elizabeth Chen stood from her seat and addressed the congregation with the authority of someone who'd been making difficult business decisions for 50 years. "The Board of Walsh Properties has voted unanimously to terminate Robert Walsh for embezzlement and appoint Emma Catherine Walsh as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. We've also authorized criminal fraud charges against Tyler Mitchell and civil litigation against Morrison and Associates for corporate conspiracy." The wedding had transformed into a legal proceeding, with evidence being presented and verdicts being delivered in front of 250 witnesses. Madison's perfect day wasn't just ruined, it was becoming the public documentation of the biggest fraud scandal Winnetka had seen in decades. Tyler finally found his voice, but it came out as desperate pleading rather than denial. "Emma, please, we can work this out privately. I'll pay back every penny, I'll make this right." "Don't do this to Madison, she didn't know about any of it." But Madison wasn't interested in Tyler's protection anymore. She was staring at the evidence scattered across the altar, realizing that her theft of my fiancé had actually saved me from financial ruin while condemning her to a lifetime of debt with a criminal. The church had descended into controlled chaos. Guests were recording everything, calling friends and family who weren't present, posting updates to social media in real time. The hashtag wedding revenge was probably already trending on Twitter. Father O'Brien looked completely overwhelmed by the situation, holding legal documents, instead of a Bible, presiding over the destruction of what was supposed to be a sacred ceremony. "Under these circumstances," he announced, "I cannot in good conscience proceed with this wedding ceremony." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle, final and irreversible. Madison's perfect wedding day was over, and my new life as the head of a $12 million empire was just beginning. 6 months later, I sit in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower, looking out over Lake Michigan, and reflecting on how completely my life has transformed. The nameplate on my desk reads Emma Catherine Walsh, Chief Executive Officer, Walsh Properties and Development. The view from up here shows the entire city where I was born, raised, and finally learned to fight for what was rightfully mine. The legal consequences unfolded exactly as Jonathan Hayes and the board had predicted. Tyler was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft, with an additional $400,000 in restitution he'll be paying off for the next decade. The underground poker debts followed him to prison, where I'm told loan sharks don't particularly care about incarceration schedules. Madison lost 75,000 Instagram followers within a week of the wedding video going viral. 5.2 million views on TikTok, countless reaction videos, and news coverage that reached as far as Good Morning America. Her brand partnerships dissolved overnight when companies realized they'd been working with someone involved in a massive fraud scandal. Last I heard, she's working at the Starbucks on Sherman Avenue in Evanston, while taking business classes at Harper College, paying her own way for the first time in her life. David Morrison was terminated from his own firm when the board learned about his investment in Tyler's fake companies and his conspiracy to defraud my family. Morrison and Associates settled our civil lawsuit for $2.3 million rather than face a public trial that would have destroyed what remained of their reputation. Morrison now works as a junior associate at a small suburban practice, designing strip malls and gas stations instead of luxury developments. My parents faced their own reckoning with reality. Dad avoided prison through a plea bargain that required him to pay back the $340,000 he'd embezzled, but his professional license was revoked permanently. He works construction now, the physical labor he always claimed was beneath him. Mom took her first job at 59 years old as a receptionist at a dental office, learning to answer phones and schedule appointments for people she used to consider her social inferiors. They've downsized everything. The Winnetka house was sold to pay legal fees and restitution. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the lifestyle they'd maintained through theft and manipulation, all of it vanished when the truth came out. They live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Mount Prospect, now learning what most people their age already know about budgeting and living within their means. Walsh Properties has thrived under my leadership in ways Victoria would have been proud to see. We've secured $90 million in development contracts, including the sustainable housing project I'd always dreamed of building. The company now employs 200 people across Chicago and Milwaukee, with plans to expand into Detroit and Indianapolis next year. The Millennium Waterfront development that Morrison stole from me became our flagship project, a mixed-use complex that provides affordable housing while meeting the strictest environmental standards. It won 3 architecture awards and attracted investment from firms across the Midwest who wanted to work with the woman who'd built an empire from betrayal. My personal life found its balance too. Daniel Kim and I have been together for 4 months now, a relationship that grew slowly and honestly without the financial desperation that had driven Tyler's deception. Daniel is a civil engineer who designs water treatment facilities, someone who builds infrastructure that actually helps people instead of fake presentations that steal from them. The board approved our relationship unanimously, though they were amused that I asked for their blessing. The relationship with my family remains complicated but honest. We speak occasionally, usually when Mom calls to ask how I'm doing or when Dad needs advice about construction projects. The dynamic has shifted completely. I'm no longer the disappointing daughter who can't live up to Madison's charm. I'm the successful CEO who holds their financial survival in my hands, and they treat me with the respect they should have shown decades ago. Madison and I had one conversation 3 months after the wedding disaster when she called to apologize. It wasn't the manipulative fake remorse I'd expected, but genuine recognition of the pain she'd caused and the patterns she needed to change. Therapy had been required as part of her plea agreement for her role in Tyler's fraud, and she was learning things about herself that 30 years of enabling had hidden. The wedding video still gets shared on social media, usually with captions about karma and justice, sometimes as inspiration for people dealing with their own family betrayals. I've become an accidental symbol of what happens when quiet people finally decide to stop being quiet, when patience transforms into strategic action. Victoria's portrait hangs behind my desk, now watching over the empire she built, and I've expanded. Sometimes I talk to her picture, telling her about contracts won and projects completed, about the foundation we've started to help women in business, and the scholarship program for architecture students from low-income families. The most important lesson I learned through this entire experience is that kindness and strength aren't opposites, that patience and passivity are completely different choices, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building the life you were meant to have while others face the consequences of their decisions to tear you down. What's your biggest betrayal story? Have you ever had someone close to you steal something that mattered deeply? I'd love to hear how you handled it in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's going through the same situation right now. If this story inspired you to believe that justice can come to those who wait for the right moment, please hit that subscribe button. There are so many more stories of quiet victories and strategic comebacks waiting to be told. Until next time. Remember that the quiet ones really do change the world. We just do it with documents instead of drama.